Gold, Chapter 2, Part 3. Chief, I was surprised as anyone. You think Father Tom's death was suspicious because of all the money? Asked John. The chief stopped in front of John's office. I thought about that. It's more of a coincidence. And though I don't believe in coincidences, I think it had to be unrelated to the crimes. Medical examiner says he died from a heart attack. Look here. You keep me informed, Neil. I mean it. Maybe I'll have something more to ask you, the chief said, motioning John out of the cruiser. Stiles added as John climbed out. You're the man's executor, and you were at a crime scene right after the crime occurred. You're involved whether you want to be or not. Whoever it was did the killings up at the monastery is sure as hell coming after you too. I have a responsibility. I want the old man to have his wishes carried out. Well, that's another reason why the killer might be following you. Maybe he thinks you don't know anything. However, he can follow you until you lead him to the money. You gotta watch out. Like I'm dangling there for him, Chief? Maybe. I don't think he'll want you dead until you lead him to the money. John said, I didn't know about the money. You have to believe me. Neil, it's not just me you got to convince. Might get a little hot around here before this is over, and I don't mean the weather. Chief went on, grinning. Money brings out everyone to claim a share. Whoever the old man was giving all that money to is going to be mighty disappointed. Someone's going to show up pretty fast to find out what happened to that last payment. There's going to be a lot of treasure hunters show up too. Word gets out. Folks smell money and they want their shares. John looked up at the sun and smiled. Bad situation, he said. The chief ended by saying, you got to remember, if something happens to you, Neil, this whole thing goes into the courts, and God only knows who will end up with the property after the lawyers get through with it. You got to stay healthy if you want to make sure the old man's wishes are carried out. As the chief drove away, John turned his mind back to the priest's estate. He took the deed for the swampland out of his pocket and looked at it. The land was an obvious hiding place for the money. He grinned when he thought of the number of people who had probably traipsed over that wilderness the moment they heard the rumor of missing money connected with the old man. Problem was that the place was a tangle of brush, and finding anything there would require stripping the place down to the earth. A large number of acres and a lot of expense. After he made sure that nothing was hidden up there, he'd see about selling it. Sell of that land might be a source of money for his sister to inherit, that is, if he could sell it. The next step he realized would be to look at the property and then see if he could find a buyer. He'd keep clear of Ricker, however, knowing that another deal on the land with that broker would only compound the priest's losses. He drove out of River Sunday in the old truck. The Nanticoke River, named for the Native American tribe that once lived in the local woodlands, came heading east in from the Chesapeake Bay. It passed on the inside of Allingham Island, a large tract of island split in use between farmlands on the most western section and the great green swamp called the Wilderness, which covered most of its eastern end, many square miles of wetland. A small creek of open water branching out from the Nanticoke cut off the end of the inland area and made it an honest island, while the Nanticoke headed on further east and northeast. Strangely, however, rather than becoming more shallow as it headed inland, the river remained deep and navigable far up its reach. It was still deep when it reached the land that Father Sweeney had bought. The road began to curve as it followed along the edge of the Nanticoke. John knew that he was closing on the small section of land that the old priest had owned. Here the river, which had been moving to the north, bore east, making a sharp turn into the hinterland of the eastern shore, before returning to its northward end. It was on the tip or point of this curve, almost a hairpin, that the old man's land was located. The road in front of the priest's land was high-crowned, as were all the back roads in this part of Maryland. On both sides of the road were deep ditches, which now in the summer were overgrown and hidden with tall grass coming out from their sides. On the opposite side of the road from the priest's swampland were the fields owned by Steve Knott, the churchman. Knott's land had been planting mostly to corn, and the green plants stretched off into the distance, to where his farmhouse was the only sign of human life. One field with a small hill in its center was planted to grass. Ahead of John, on the same side of the road as the marsh, was the Tolman place, with its own cornfields. Crows circled in the bright blue, making occasional cries of irritation at John's presence. The air was hot but quiet and peaceful, and had an odor of fresh corn mixed with dust.